And we're on. So, welcome everyone. I'd like to first welcome you all to our webinar, Building Security In: The Journey to Secure by Design in a Dynamic AppSec World. Before we get started, I'd like to read you a privacy disclaimer. I want to make a quick announcement regarding privacy and data protection. As this webinar may involve the sharing of sensitive information, we kindly ask all participants to respect the confidentiality of the information presented. Please do not record, distribute, or utilize any part of this webinar without explicit permission from the organizers and presenters. Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar. My name is Boaz Barzel. I'm the field CTO at Ox Security, and we are very fortunate to have a panel of industry experts with us today. Vikram, Lakshmi, and Curtis. They will introduce themselves later on, and they all bring diverse perspective of what it means to build security in and the journey to make it successful. Let's get real. Security is really everyone's responsibility, but in practice, sometimes it seems like it's nobody's responsibility, because especially when we're involving developers, they want to code fast, security teams want zero risk, and leadership really wants the next release released yesterday. So today we're going to start to challenge the status quo. We're going to ask hard questions around, can security ever be truly built in? Or security is just a checkbox we slap in on the SDLC to make ourselves feel better. The secure by design buzzwords, it sounds really great on paper, but when reality comes in, it looks very different. Breaches caused by application vulnerabilities still dominate the headlines. And the reason is because despite all those tools and processes and best intentions, security is usually seen as a blocker and not an enabler. So our discussion today will cut through really the fluff, and we'll get to the heart of the matter. We'll explore cultural tensions, process pitfalls, inconvenient truth, and the tools we rely on. Most importantly, we'll ask, are we really addressing the evolving threat landscape, or are we just running in circles? Our panelists today will contribute from their experience to build a journey to secure by design that helps you overcome cultural tensions, pitfalls, inconveniences, and really get some actionable insights that will help you leapfrog and accelerate your journey to successfully building security. We'll talk about culture and accountability, tooling versus talent, threat landscape myth, and we'll also take your questions live. So don't hold back. Let's make this a real conversation. And during this session, please write your question in the Q&A session, and we'll be able to answer it live. We'll have a Q&A session also at the end. So feel free and let's contribute to the discussion. Now, I'm excited to get our panelists to introduce themselves. And Vikram, let's start with you.
Thank you, boss. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Vikram Barate. I'm based in India, Pune, and I work as a VP of Engineering at GS Lab Gavs. GS Lab Gavs is into product engineering services targeted toward a very high-tech technology industry. I myself is from the engineering background, starting from the development to enter product engineering releases, specifically into domain of telecom, networking, and network security. So I work on the product lines, which includes Edge firewall, SOHO firewalls, IPS, IDS, signaling firewall into complex infrastructure, as well as the network security, which includes the pipeline security using encryption and authentication technologies. So that's in short the background that I have.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Vikram. Narshiman, for you.
Yeah, thank you, boss. Good morning, good evening, everyone. So I'm Lakshmi Narasimhan. I represent an organization called Intellect Design Arena. So I'm representing in my personal capacity here for this session. However, all my experiences, whatever has been taken from the industry all along, will be shared over here. That said, I have more than 2 decades of experience in information security. Currently, I'm a VP and a CISO for Intellect Design Arena. So, Intellect is a fintech organization based out of India, headquartered in Chennai. So, we are a global product organization servicing all the larger banks and insurance sectors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Curtis, to you.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks, Boaz, and thanks to my fellow presenters for being here and everyone here who's listening. I'm Curtis. I've been in security for a little over 20 years, done everything from high tech to banking and insurance, open source, and even a little bit of startup here and there. I'm currently the head of application security for Gen Digital, and I'll be surprised if you've heard of us. Most people haven't. I like to describe us as the alphabet of security companies because you've heard of our products. You've heard of Norton, LifeLock, Avast, Avira, AVG, and CCleaner. Those are our biggest products. So my job is to make sure that every single product we put out, every back-end service, every bit of connecting software is as secure as we can possibly make it to deliver on our promise to keep our customers secure. So I'm really looking forward to an exciting conversation this afternoon. And I'm an American who happens to live in Amsterdam, so one of those weird expat people.
That's fantastic. Very good, very good. So without, taking too much time, let's start talking more about, is security a blame game between developers, security, and leadership? And we'll ask a few questions really regarding that aspect and talk more focusedly on the accountability and the cultural aspect. And maybe I'll start with Lakshmi, with you, and let's talk about developers. How they're usually unfairly blamed for security issues, or is this their responsibility to fix vulnerabilities in their code?
Yeah, boss, I think in your introduction, you did mention security is a shared responsibility. So there can't be one answer as such to this question. That's my view. However, management will always have an expectation that, developers get it right the first time. And it's a question of quality, it's a question of productivity for any organization, right? Having said that, there are multiple factors, right? So what contributes to the success of a developer? Fundamentally, the fabric of the organization, the cultural fabric which you touched upon, is a very essential element that needs to be factored in terms of contribution to the success of a developer. And more importantly, what is their awareness level? Uh, are they equipped adequately to deliver in a secure way? That is very important. And then the other important element or a contribution that is coming to a developer side is the kind of support system that is available to them. It could be in the form of a security champion or a security team or a go-to person who's there to guide them whenever they are stuck as part of their development journey. These are very, very essential elements that contributes. If you look at a less process-centric organization, probably there the security discovery happens, right? The issues gets discovered towards the back end of a project, or even at times when the system goes live. So that is where it is very important. That's where people look at uh, a single role player who can be given that kind of an accountability. It has to be fixed whether we like it or not. Developer has a share in terms of taking it on their shoulders. So that's my take on that.
Exactly. And this is something important because as we're talking about accountability here, when we talk about shift left in that sense, shift left becomes some sort of a mantra that I'd like to say we dump that responsibility and accountability onto developers. And we're not always giving them proper support. And Curtis, I'd like to hear more from your end. Is it really just a mantra, or is there something else that you've been doing, within your company that helps them give them that proper support?
If shift left is a mantra, then it's a failed mantra because the idea of shift left is not just that something is being done. It's that it's being done early. And I think this is where it ties in with, what you're asking, Lakshmi, that it shouldn't be a blame game. Developers, in my opinion, do bear the responsibility for the code that they write. We as security practitioners bear the responsibility for informing them of how that code performs. And shift left, I think, is part of that. When done correctly, shift left is really about giving developers information early so they can address the problem when it's most easy and cheap to deal with. So when I talk about this with our development teams, I'm usually talking about how do I give you the best information I can possibly give you as early as I can give it. I'm attempting to give it in the IDE. I'm attempting to give it every time they check in code, and we're obviously give it every time they build. And then the other thing that comes as part of shift left is, I think, a very serious conversation about what quality bars are part of that. So that everybody is on the same page about what they have to do in order to move forward in the software development pipeline. And I think shift left is a way of really setting things in the security practitioner's mind that we need to be a partner with the development organization, and we need to be doing that early and often and giving them high quality information so they can make decisions about, hey, do I write this new feature right now, or do I fix this security issue I've got? And if security issues are properly communicated and properly prioritized, then development teams have plenty of time to make those decisions and put out high quality software.
And Vikram, what's your recommendation? How do organizations, from your perspective, balance that pressure between delivery and security practices?
That's a long, I guess, long time challenge almost everyone has faced. Basically, when you look at the product engineering life cycle, and if you look at the timeline traits, in the engineering life cycle, particularly, the security issues are not given that much of weightage because they don't contribute that much of visible impact that they can have. So in case you are delayed in your feature deliverables, that has a visible impact immediately, whereas security features do not give that impact into your project at the stage of engineering of the project. That's why usually there is always a struggle, but there are very standard practices always defined for security. There are principles defined for security by design that needs to be followed. There are tools which are already available so that you don't have to spend a lot of effort to get the right technology implementation. To give very basic examples, you can use the right coding language, like latest version of C++, which has a lot of vulnerability already handled, right version of open source, right tools available in the market. Just the right seriousness of using those needs to be there. So I think when you consider the balance between the rapid development of the security practices, I'll say that can be addressed by something like, till date, security is considered as a non-functional requirement. So I guess that needs to be converted into functional requirement, and then only it can be taken seriously. I think some part that Curtis mentioned as, like, you can have IDE already ready, or the code base, certain libraries. He was mentioning on certain practices and certain tooling being available. That can give that answer, but I think having it as a functional requirement can make a lot of difference than considering it as a non-functional.
That's very good. That's very good. And I think one point that comes clear from this area is that if we want to make it functional, if we want to ensure that we have the developer's attention, so getting those, let's say, KPIs or measurements that everyone's share. So we're not looking at developers' measurements, security measurements, business measurements, and they're all different. One way that I found from working with a lot of customers as well is it's the same measurement. So everybody's measured the same thing, and once we start measuring the same thing, then we are able to create that shared language, shared accountability, and we all work towards the same goal, and not each team works toward different goals.
Well, to add on to that, I think one of the other ways you can think about it is as a quality metric. The reality is yeah, lots of teams want to make security to be an add-on, or they want to do it, it ends up being late or whatnot. But if we think about it as a quality metric and how that affects the package we're putting out and the product we're creating, I think it becomes a easier thing to sell to the internal teams about what they're doing. I mean, when you think about it, if I've got a race condition in my package or in my software package, then I've got a problem with performance, but it's also a security issue. Or if I've got a problem where someone, can subvert a part of the system, an authentication problem, that's also going to be a quality problem because users' data is going to be put at risk. So if we can speak the language of quality with teams, as you're saying, speak the language that they're in, and maybe that's a functional requirement, maybe it's not. Then I think we get a better foothold to have that discussion.
Exactly. Lakshmi, what do you think from, what's the biggest cultural challenges that are getting in the way? So outside of the metrics that you just talked about, from a cultural perspective, what kind of the challenges that you see in that sense?
See, from a cultural perspective, it is very important that the team gets the required support from the management. There are arrangements in terms of timelines, tools, education, empowerment. All of these are the cultural fabric. When we talk about the initial question that you asked around the blame game around the developers taking the larger share when it comes to security issues, these are the contributors. Significant contributors are the organization culture in terms of how it is going to influence them. In most cases, what we have seen in the history, it is either because of a very very stringent timeline with which they are expected to deliver, or it is because of the lack of awareness in terms of not letting them know what is the actual baseline, or not giving the right priorities or weightages around security adoption. So those are something, in some cases, not in pervasiveness, I'm saying, at times it is seen as an overhead by the team. So that is very important. So culturally, these are something that needs to come together, and then more the stakeholders, it means it requires more the coordination. So it's very very important, right? So my take on that is setting the baselines, giving clarity to the people, uh, equipping them better with the right set of frameworks, guidelines, tool sets, and then giving them the right time to work on some of these things, and also have some expert intervention whenever it is needed. So once you have this kind of a fabric, the cultural adoption, then obviously the outcomes are something that will be very certain.
Yes, and I'd like to ask Curtis a little bit about the tools. So you mentioned the tools that we all know and love around Norton and Avast and CCleaners. Do you think we're spending too much on tools and not enough on training developer how to write secure code?
I think that depends on the organization. I think those are two sides of the same coin. And my application security team actually owns both of those at Gen. We're not just owning tools, we own the security training part of it. And I like to position us as trusted advisors to the engineering and CTO organizations. So when they have issues, they can come to us and ask questions. We also run the bug bounty program. So I think that gives us really good, massive round view of what we're doing and how it's working. And I think that if you're not using that information to create training, then you're missing out on some of the best parts of the tools you've got. So I really am a big fan of saying, well, hey, here's a great thing we saw out of our bug bounty program. Let's talk about that at a brown bag with our developers, because there's a good chance that this isn't just an isolated thing. Or hey, we can take the data out of our SaaS tool and see what the most common written vulnerability is, and then we can have pointed training to help those teams avoid that in the future. So I think those two things have to go hand in hand, and when done really well, they become a coupled pair that allow you to really accelerate what you're doing in security.
That's a very good. That's a very good insight. And Vikram, from your end, how do you ensure that security tools provide the insights, without really overburdening developers if we're in that topic?
Yes. So the main purpose of getting security tools in place is to report the overall vulnerabilities that you found in the tool, in the project, or in the code, in the design, all the aspects. Uh, but when you look at the output, usually the tools gives output which can be some of which is relevant, some of which may not be relevant, some of which can be uh, very critical to the project, and some which may be very generic, but developers are being pushed to fix those. So I think the right approach there should be to identify the right threats those being reported by the tools and address those first. We need to report those pretty much like we report the bugs, which are the critical, which are relevant for the application. And I think just running a generalized tool and getting a report and asking developers to fix all of those, instead of that, if you can make customized threat models for the application that is being developed and design the tools to work in that fashion, I think that will give a better impact. And so many times the issues are being reported, but developers are not very well aware of the threat models or the impacts. So I think in along with the issues, exactly what to be fixed, if that is to be that is getting reported, and then I think developers will be more okay to accept that. If they will not look at it as just something that to be fixed. They will really look at it as a feature or a bug, critical bug that to be fixed, and how to fix that. So I think these tools and its output can itself be used as a training ground for developers to know the security threat models.
That's a fantastic feedback, and I'd like to connect everything we just said into kind of the triangle of people, process, technology, where, when we talk about the people, so we have the teams themselves, developers, security teams, the technology that we're using. So beside the fact that every team uses a different set of technologies, we'll need to talk about how we are connecting between those technologies. Really, from a process perspective, as you mentioned, threat modeling. Threat modeling is something that we usually hear, that's something that security teams are doing. And when we're talking about secure by design, we need to understand better, I think, the role of threat modeling within kind of the secure by design and how we are making it more approachable maybe to developers. And Lakshmi, maybe you can share a little bit from your experience around that topic.
Sure. I think it's a very, very important aspect. Though threat model as a concept has been in existence for nearly 2+ decades. Some it's a very important topic in my view when we talk about SDLC, right? A proper threat model, if we can do it using the right set of methodologies and tool sets, then it can give a significant value to the overall ecosystem. The first and foremost aspect I see from a threat model is looking at it and deriving at the possible attack surfaces. The moment you are aware of the appropriate attack surface that may exist in the system, then it kinds of uncovers all your blind spots. It helps you plan it better, more from a countermeasure perspective, be it from the system within the code or with a complementary set of tool stacks or additional security components that may be added as a tier in your overall deployment architecture. So most importantly, what is the value add with that model is it gives clarity to people, and most importantly it brings a lot of alignment. So teams will be able to look at the security needs better and early on in an SDLC lifecycle, and it derives a lot of value, especially if we are designing a larger system from the scratch. So these are my takes on threat model. It's a very, very important aspect in SDLC.
Boss, may I add
Yeah,
something?
go ahead.
Yeah. So when we talk of shift left, I think one part where we stop is at the requirement. I think we need to, if you look at it as a value chain system, we need to shift more left. Wherein, if you look at the developers, they are getting trained on the security the way RSA works, the way handshake works, the way authentication works, but they are not getting trained on the threat model. because most of the threat model, how those threat model works is the knowledge that pretty much resides with the experts like Curtis and Lakshmi. But when it comes to developer, when they get trained on how to think in the threat models, I think then that will get ingrained in overall the value chain system of the engineering.
That's true. That's true. And I actually read something interesting. I don't really remember where it was, but they were talking about the fact that they shifted left so much. They actually started a year and a half to plan for the service before they even started developing. But it also comes in as an identification, or basically as a way for us to start thinking ahead of time. And if we know, as you said, planning on a service or a new application, and we know the content, from encryption to the fact that there will be a web UI written in a specific language, or we're going to process PII or sensitive information, we can start raising question on where are we going to deploy it, what type of other security measures, even before we start developing. So these areas are especially important since, as you mentioned before, we can help developer to start thinking in that sense. So if I'm deploying in the cloud and I'm processing sensitive information and I'm using a database, well, the database should be encrypted. And what type of encryption? Start thinking in a way that I need to understand what will be done and what will be the case. Now, if we'll continue, Lakshmi, so as we're doing the threat modeling and we're thinking ahead, we still have application deployed. We still have application deployed with vulnerabilities. We still have those critical vulnerabilities, even though we've done the threat modeling and we've already sync. As we're developing, stuff happens. So how do you prioritize in your organization those vulnerabilities that you have to deal with right now, especially where developers are constantly submitting new codes and we need to release? So what's your take on this?
Sure, boss. See, fundamentally, threat modeling is associated with the design level planning, whereas vulnerability management is more associated with operations. That's how I look at it. Of course, vulnerability management requires a lot of planning. It has to get closely integrated with all the standard processes. Could be your change management process, could be your patch management process. What is more important from a vulnerability perspective is, like Vikram said earlier, the context is very important. There are many 0 days, many critical advisories that are getting released. So there is no need to panic for everything that we get notified. So it's very important to associate the vulnerability to the context of our system and see and apply a due diligence in terms of how we can prioritize some of those addressing of those vulnerabilities. So it requires impact analysis. It requires careful planning. There is a lot of coordination and project management involved, especially with the system downtimes, approvals, in terms of moving it from one environment to other environment, doing the sanity check. It's very important that it is a guided process, and that it has the required focus and the right stakeholders are getting aligned. So these are very, very important from a vulnerability management perspective. These are my quick takes, and it's very, very important from a especially in a complex ecosystem in banks and a larger industries. This is a very, very important area which requires dedicated attention and focus. So that's where I want to leave it.
Well, I think that raises an interesting bit for both of you, and I think what we're all getting at here is that it's a unified thing. There tends to be a tendency to think of these security activities as siloed things, and they're not. In really well done places, they are coordinated efforts that feed on each other. And one of the areas I'd like to point out is, you mentioned, since we've been talking about threat models, is one of the ways I really like to use threat models is also looking at how we affect other parts of the system. And when I say that, I mean other parts of our software build system. So a threat model can be really good in saying, well, hey, here are things I need to think about, and you're right, at a design level, Lakshmi. But I think it also can be used to affect downstream things. You can say, well, hey, I know I have this section of code. I'm worried about it from the threat model, but I have a really good, say, SaaS tool, and the SaaS tool can address the threat I see here. Great. There may be other threats they can't, and I think that is also important to say, hey, here's areas that our SAST and our DAST and maybe our SCA tool don't cover very well. Hey, red team, when you guys do your assessment, this is an area you should focus on because my tools don't cover it very well. Or hey, let's write an automated test that can be run regularly to make sure that we're properly implementing a security feature or that we haven't reintroduced a security bug. And then, lastly, you can say, okay, it's great. I've done all these things. I think I've gotten really good coverage. But if you've got a bug bounty program, you can also go out and say, hey, trusted bug bounty testers, we're going to give you a beta version of this. We'd like you to go after this particular section to see if you find anything new. So I think when you think about it as a coordinated system, you also get much better. And I think the danger that we often fall into, especially at complex companies, is we think very silently, and we have to sort of get away from that and think of this, as I said, as a super connected system that feeds on and feeds back to the different parts.
Absolutely, absolutely. See, the reason why I said vulnerability will be more operational in nature is because when you do it at a design level, it is more of a prototype where you still have an option to bring in the right set of components, right set of versions. You remove all the obsolete elements which are probably known to us from a vulnerability standpoint, so on and so forth. Of course, your point is very valid. We can move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I largely agree with you that, that vulnerability management sometimes gets thought of as a secondary child to what we're doing in software development. But the reality is once you release something, you're still responsible for it. You're probably going to put out a new version unless you're going to EOL it and end of life. And that is a whole nother problem and process in of itself.
That's true. And the way I sometimes see it is thinking of a funnel, like you have, in sales, where you do the threat modeling, secure by design. There's a big risk that you're trying to mitigate. The better you do it on the top, the less comes into the funnel, which means your security tools, all the assessments that you're doing, basically becomes more, I would say, accurate because you've tackled the big issues. You don't have to redo them again. And I'll continue with you, Curtis, around, so you talked about unification, but I do want to understand what are the essential tools that you see as the important one in the CI/CD process as you're building the application, as you've released the application, and now you're going and trying to understand the vulnerability management aspect?
Well, I think that's going to vary a little bit by, market and sector. Like, hey, people who are doing web development are going to have a very different focus than teams like me who are just still doing a lot of, client development. But for me, the first and most essential thing is training. And when I say training, I don't just mean like, hey, how to write a threat model or hey, how to write secure code. I mean, hey, what does our security pipeline look like? If your own developers don't understand how your security practices fit on top of what's happening, then you've missed a golden opportunity to have them also input into that. And I also think that there's a great saying that says the first weapon is the mind. And if people aren't trained to think and reason about it, then they're not going to do anything else. So I think it becomes dangerous to depend on certain tools. After that, I am a big fan of SaaS, DAST, and SCA tools because I think they can give us a vast amount of data. But that's also the danger. They can give you too much data. So I think it's really important to understand the story you want to tell out of the system to help developers understand what's happening with whatever it is they're creating. And so you need to be prepared to tune and care for and feed all of those things. So I think that's sort of the super essentials. After that, you can get more complex, and I think that complexity only comes with maturity, and that's the harder part here too. Is everyone wants to get to being a super mature organization, but it takes time. And so I would also say that the next thing is to learn from what you've done. That's the next most essential thing. Having a feedback loop that helps the organization learn from what it's already got to understand where its next threat might be. I think that's probably the more important part of that. So I think when it comes down to essential bits, it's going to move around a little bit for each organization. But I think that those four things really sort of call out the data I need to have, how I need to think about it, and then how I'm learning from it.
Yes, that's a very good take. And what's your take, Vikram? Where should we really focus our effort from your perspective? Where do you think that, you can use your current organization as example, or from your perspective, if you would have to focus your effort right now as a recommendation to the people that watch us, what will be your answer to that?
So, the, this is, as I said, this is the problem that has been discussed for ages. But still, we are like, and there are some grounds which are said, there are tools available, and there are very basics to be followed, but not getting followed. And that is where the tools comes in picture. To if you are not doing it manually, let tool do that. And I will say let's rely more on that. In a way, now the new tools are coming like Copilot. So, so maybe we can we can just tune these tools to rely more on this kind of tools. These tools provide a vast amount of data. They know vast amount of vulnerability already. So in case you are writing a code, a very simple thing like if you are breaching open source license, and you can do that unknowingly. And then this is the tool having this large data available, and it can tell you immediately that something is going wrong. You need to fix it. These tools also comes with plugins available with them. And best part of these tools, like Copilot, is that you can write your own plugins. So in case the kind of application you are developing, you can have your own plugin written and plugged into these Copilots for your own specific threat model. So that those will be taken care of pretty much at the development cycle that is there. So I think more reliance on the upcoming technologies, and we need to rely on the tools finally, even though we define all the processes. But more reliance on the upcoming tool, more utilization of that can definitely help in this case.
I really agree with it, not because I'm from Ox Security, but as the industry constantly evolve and innovate, there's new tools and new ways to attack, let's say, year-old problem. If we would have to deal with a log4j, for example, today, it will take us a few minutes. When we had to deal with log4j 3 years ago, it took us months. And that advancement in technology, I think it's really a great point and a good point to, as you're building your people process technology from a technology perspective, constantly ensure that you know what the latest technology can provide you and how it can improve everything else you're doing. Let's jump a little bit forward and talk a little bit on two different and interconnected topics, compliance and AI. And when we talk about compliance and AI, let's start with Lakshmi, maybe you, around, are compliance frameworks actually improving security, or it's just an illusion? And where do you think AI comes into the play?
Okay. I think it is actually both. When we say whether compliance is improving security or whether it is an illusion, again, it depends on the organization. What is important here is, are we implementing the controls in spirit, or it is seen more as a tick in the box exercise, right? Again, compliance in many cases, the interpretations are left to the implementers. In some cases, there is a overarching framework or a guidelines that are available. Largely, it is not prescriptive. In some cases, it is. So it's up to the implementer and the context of the organization to do a thorough validation. And if it is done appropriately, then there is certainly a value add. It will definitely improve the overall security posture of the organization. The intent and objective with which the compliance is being mandated will truly be achieved. And when we talk about AI, as all of us know, I think AI is inevitable, and it is there everywhere, in every field, every part, whatever we are talking. And we were discussing about different tools. Curtis was mentioning about his interest around SAS test and several other tools. So likewise, AI embedded, of course, Vikram was also talking about Copilot and other things. So the AI embedded element is something that we will have to live with, and it is a boon in a larger sense. It's going to eliminate the time and effort. At the same time, we need to tread it with caution. From a compliance standpoint, some of us are aware the global regulations or the regional regulations around AI is also coming up. In some parts of the world, it's already there. So industry is catching up with some of these regulations while it's settling itself with the impact it is creating on the ground, right? So it will take its own time, but it's rapidly evolving. It will go hand in hand, and it will be definitely be a complementary factor for the security professionals. This is my take on this.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say that compliance is a good baseline, also a good way to compare the security baseline between companies. It's definitely not something you want to rely on, especially today with everything that's happening. And if we look at AI from a different perspective, and Curtis, maybe I'll ask you around, is the industry really overestimating the risk that AI poses or AI driven attack poses? Or is that something that we're not there yet and we shouldn't be too much worried?
I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg right now. I can tell you that our threat intelligence team here at Gen is very interested in what's happening with generative AI, largely around the social engineering associated with it, because it's allowing attackers to create much better attacks, and use larger sources of information to use to trick users. Um, it's an interesting path we're going on. I think a great example of that is what happened, to the casinos last year in Vegas, and that was before generative AI. But what you saw there was an American gang doing the language and a Russian gang doing the technology, and they used that very successfully, to take down some very large corporations and probably walk away with a very large amount of money. AI, to a large degree, allows smaller organizations to do that in a much more successful way. And so I think that's part of the danger of it. Or when we're looking at it as an external thing, when we're looking at it from an application security thing, I think the threat model changes a little bit. And the one that I've talked about very often is, did we accidentally just put open source software in our code? Like, you've got this great Copilot thing. That's awesome. What was it taught on? And when you asked it a question, did it spit back an answer that's literally the function from an open source package? And by copy pasting, just like we might, hey, we all do it. We get on Google, we search for some code, we might change it a little bit and we put it in. But if I let the AI do it directly, who's overseeing that? What's it doing? So I think those are really interesting questions that we don't quite have the answers to yet. We're just seeing the beginning of that. But I also think that AI is going to be here to stay. I think its ability to help people do the work they want to do faster and better is a real thing. And I think if you don't learn how to use AI prompts effectively, you're going to sort of get left behind. But we do need to be cognizant of what that means for organizations and what we're going to do with it, and what sort of interactions we want. And Jen's even gone so far as we have an experimental app called Genie that's designed to help people look and see if they're getting frauded. Like, you can take a text message or an email and put it in, and Genie can tell you things about it. So I think there's two parts to this, and I think we're just at the beginning of something that's going to be really interesting for the industry.
That's really great. And also, there's something that we like to use when we call man in the middle, where with all the feedback loops that we have through AI, from training models to the prompts that we're using and the outputs then later on, right now we're seeing a lot of companies using that type of man in the middle to start validating, to understand that we're training on the right material or right data, that our prompts are returning valid answer and not hallucination or anything like that. And as you're saying, we're in the tip of the iceberg. As we're moving away from man in the middle to another AI that will inspect the AI and then starting to quickly learn and quickly develop. And of course, both from the attacking side and the defending side, we can do both. I think we'll see some sort of an acceleration where the rate of the technology, instead of doubling itself every couple of months, couple of years, it will change on a weekly basis. And we'll probably use AI to catch up because we'll, as humans, probably won't be able to do it ourselves.
Well, and like any new
Yeah.
technology, there's still a lot we just don't know. I mean, you can see that in sort of the fun attacks you can do with AI. Like one of our guys during the early parts of Genie actually got it to talk like a pirate. So he was just bored and said, "Hey, talk like a pirate. Hey, you should do that." And the next thing we knew, it was talking like a pirate to other people. So it was like, "Hey, wait a minute, that's not how that's supposed to work." Like, I think there's a lot going on here with new technology, and I want to be not alarmist about it, but at the same time, I want to be cautious about how we're deploying it, what we're doing with it. And we do need to think carefully. You can't just throw an LLM at or in something and expect it to be great the first time.
Vikram, do you want to add something?
Yeah, just a small point to add. We work with multiple customers, and what we found, there is a trend that to force engineers to improve their productivity by a certain percent by using AI tools and Copilot and others. What I think is the AI tools can really help improve efficiency of the code, not the productivity of the engineer. So for example, the identifying the open source, obviously keeping all the questions that Curtis raised, just taking some part, identifying the open source breach, finding the vulnerability at the right time, the effort that is going to get saved, which can be later on be very costly. I think if the real use of AI can be used in effectiveness of the code that is getting generated, that rather how much time people save on writing the code.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do right now is I'd like to take a few questions from the audience. I see in our Q&A session. I'll just read the question out loud. Feel free to jump in and answer it. Let's start with the first one. In each of your opinions, how early into a project or development do your security team get involved? And if you can give an example on that.
I think the earlier you can get a security team involved, the better. In my experience at both Microsoft and at Gen and where I am now, we get involved as early as, hey, I have an idea. Like we really have, the idea of an open door policy, I think, is important so that they can come by and sort of throw ideas over the wall. We purposely sit our desks in the office near the CTO organization so we can have those sorts of conversations. Like, hey, we have this idea. That's really interesting. Here's how we think it can go wrong. And I think a big part of that is also understanding what the business wants to achieve. So yeah, that's my experience: is get security involved early, get them involved often, make sure they know how to contact you when they've got questions. We need to be trusted partners to be effective. I think that's the bottom line for me.
That's right. Just to add to what Curtis says, in our case, if it is a product that's getting developed and we discussed about threat model and the early on from a blueprint perspective, once we have a blueprint, that's an early stage where things comes together from a security perspective. Or if it is more of a customer centric delivery or a development that happens. So it starts from the early stage, from your requirements gathering till your delivery or post delivery support. So you get the security requirements integrated, or the role of a security champion is very critical. It gets integrated into all phases as long as it's been identified and the stakeholders know the role play very clearly in terms of when to reach out, where to seek help. I think then the program will be successful.
Yeah, that's very good. We're also seeing a lot of that, companies using those security champions all around. And Also, it's something that we're seeing in different industries. You want to get the resources closer to the people that are actually working in the field. We sometimes call them focal points, so that someone which will be an immediate way for you to get some sort of an answer, even though they're not the expert, they're working close to those experts very closely. So this is really a good point. There's another question, really, and I think it's coming from the topic on AI and machine learning. How do we make sure we're using these technologies safely and not creating new problems, trying to solve old ones?
Yeah, I think Curtis answered that very well already. That though there are a lot of benefits that we see, we need to be careful. The technology is going to stay here. We need to live with the technology. So right way, I think, is go with the flow, adopt the technology, but be careful at the same time. So exact same questions came up in internal discussion in my team as well, that Curtis is. Well, tool is so strong, it can tell you, I mean, there are commercial tools available in the market which are very costly to tell you whether you are breaching open source, and now you're going to get it for free. But exactly what is the source behind it? And that is the question getting asked. So I think we need to use the technologies, but at the same time, we need to be a bit careful. Even though technology is free, I mean, say we are relying a lot on open source, but benefit with open source is it's open. We know what is there. Even the vulnerabilities are available to us. Now, this is pretty much open closed technology. It's available to us, but what is it using and what's happening behind the door is closed to us.
Yeah.
I would also add that, hey, experimentation is a good thing. There's a reason we build prototypes. There's a reason we build alphas. And then, as you know, as I mentioned earlier, if you've got a bug bounty, especially in management like this type we've got, if you can release early to them, they're going to know stuff you don't. Like, don't expect to be the expert on something right away. There's a lot of people out there to help you. But I would say be cautious about what you hook it up to. Like, don't just go, "Hey, this is great. Let's take the latest LLM and hook it up to our, our customer database." That's probably not the greatest place to go right away. But yeah, experiment. Take some time to really get to know it. I would say review a lot of the documentation that's out there for how to make an LLM hallucinate. Try some of the fun, hack me games out there to learn more. But be prepared for it to fail. It's new, it's not perfect, and we think we have a lot to learn. We have a lot to learn.
That's right.
Exactly.
And to add to Curtis, if it is something that we are doing more from a learning perspective, it is very important in terms of what data we are going to feed. And if we can have those LLMs locally hosted rather than leveraging any of the SaaS-based LLMs, then probably you are covering the organization and the data set, whatever you are using for the research or the learning or the initial curiosity around how this can be used on a larger scale within the system. So those are something that the guardrails are very important in terms of adopting the LLMs or AI models. So very, very important.
Fantastic. Now, before we conclude, we have a few minutes to the hour. I'd like each of you to provide our audience with one best practice or recommendation from your experience that you feel they should take with themselves as they're building security in. Lakshmi, maybe we start with you.
So for me, it is about understanding the context of each role and how they are contributing from a security perspective. The KRAs, if it can be made very clear to all the stakeholders early on, and align them with the best practices, and enable them with the right set of uh, documents, tools, the experts reach out, whatever is needed for them from an enablement standpoint. It's not just about questioning them at a later stage, it's about enabling them at the right time. So if that can be done, so that's the best thing that can happen to an organization, and it will always enrich the culture.
Very good. Vikram?
Yeah, I would like to answer in the form of one analogy. Whenever we create highways, with security in mind. We create the cars with security in mind. So those are all look at those as the tools available to you. So everything, all the practices are there with security in mind. But finally, it's up to the driver, how he drives the car. And I think that is where exactly the training part, the culture part, and enablement part that most of the part that's come in the discussion, a lot of those Lakshmi raised. I think those are the key things to train, to make sure that the right culture already ingrained into engineers.
Fantastic. Very good advice. Curtis?
If I give anyone any advice in security, I think the first thing you need to do is understand what your business wants to do. If you don't understand what the goals of the business are or the company, then you're going to have a tough time. You're going to be swimming upstream a lot. But if you understand what they're trying to achieve, that allows you to do two things. One is it allows you to align your security program to the business goals that want to be achieved, and it basically attach your wagon, to whatever it is they're doing to get supercharged. The second is it allows you to understand the threats that matter to the business. You never want to walk in the room and tell them about, something you think is terribly scary that they basically shrug their shoulders at. If you can walk in the room and say, I have a threat, and that threat directly relates to this business outcome or this feature that you're trying to build that you think is the next great thing, then they care about it a lot more. So, if you've got to get your mindset as a security practitioner into the mindset of the business.
Fantastic. That's very good advice. And with this, I really want to extend a huge thank you to you, our panelists, for really the candid insight and the fresh perspective, I would say, around the experience that you're sharing. I understand and I know that it will resonate with our audience because today, as all companies, I think, experience complexities. No one is safe, I would say. And when we are looking into building security and then helping from a cultural perspective, collaboration, and really understanding that we are all in this together. Eventually, every technology we will use, every process we'll create, will eventually come to the people that are taking the accountability, the ownership, and the understanding on how we are working it together. So today, in a lot of companies, I would say the status quo is challenging, and what we were here to do is to challenge the status quo. So with this, I really want to extend a lot of thank you for you, Lakshmi, Vikram, and Curtis. And really, I think what we're trying to do here is really starting to become a reality. From secure by design, threat modeling, building innovative application, we are taking, I believe, a step further into kind of the future through AI and technology that we're talked about. We're making sure to watch ourselves. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like to thank you all for the audience who are listening to us. We are really looking forward to host more discussion like this in the future. So follow us, follow Ox Security on LinkedIn, stay up to date with the upcoming webinars. So thank you, everyone, and let's rock.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Boaz.
boss.
It was really fun. And
Thank you.
Vikram and Lakshmi. It's great meeting you guys and having this awesome
Yes.
event.
Same here, Curtis.
Great talking to all.
Thank you.
Thanks for moderating, boss. Good interaction.